Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining our webinar today. We're going to be focusing on European companies coming into the US, very much focused on US tax, immigration, and also relocation. And the three kind of go hand in hand together. So we'll be spending a bit of time with my three panelists today just to go through some of the planning and some of the sort of practicalities around those sort of those issues. My name's David Livett. I'm the global practice leader at GTN for business traveller and remote workers. And you know, why are we doing this now? I think that's probably the first. We'll start there with why we're doing this now, because I think that's probably a relevant question to ask. You know, we're seeing the borders open up again. I think as more countries do open their borders, and hopefully with more announcements coming up, we know it's every so often it sort of starts to open and then it sort of comes back a bit again. But hopefully with those borders opening, that will, you know, we'll see an increase in sort of travel and companies sending people over to the US. We're also seeing a sort of other trends emerge as well, and one of those is really the move away from global mobility to more of a sort of people mobility kind of focus, where individuals, it's not necessarily the companies that are moving them, it's also people thinking about, well, I can work anywhere, I want to do something different. So they're looking at other options themselves in terms of how can they look at relocating themselves. Are there other alternatives out there in the market which can help them move, for example? And I think that goes hand in hand, therefore, with the experience. And one of those key factors there is digitalization. And we're seeing this more and more throughout our respective industries, just how much, you know, the digital economy and the digitalization of our services is more and more in demand. And I think is expected really from our client base. And the last thing I'd say is just really some of the infrastructural changes here in the US. We saw Biden's plan, the current administration, and it's I can't remember how much the exact number is, but the $1 trillion. Lynn, do you remember what number it is? I can't remember off the top of my head, but
no,
you know, that plan just means that there's a huge amount of growth opportunity here in the US, and with a skills and labor shortage, you know, companies are going to be looking for expertise from around the world to come and help, you know, rebuild US infrastructure. So you know, I think that's inevitable. So I think all the signs are looking positive. So what we thought is that we would get this group together today and look at some of these issues, go a little bit in depth, and help you try and work out and plan what you need to think about in terms of whether it's or first time into the US, or whether it's just you're reopening your programs, your mobility programs, whether it's a company or as an individual into the US. So let me, and I'll pause for now, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves. I'll start with you, Thomas, first.
Thank you, David. So yeah, my name is Thomas Sök. I'm the director for the US operations of NOAA Mobility. And as most of you can hear, I have a little bit of an accent, so I'm a European based in the US. So I know what I'm talking about because I went through all of this. And my experience, and that's also how and why NOAA Mobility was found, which was basically found in 2018 back in Europe, is to make relocation easier and more flexible for everybody. We are helping individuals as well as companies with their relocation issues. Our goal is to become the Uber of relocation. I know it's a long way to go, but it's such a genius of how easily this very complicated process could be done throughout transparency, throughout our help, having first-class customer service on the ground, but also being able to be there for tech-savvy people to just easily work with our platform or our app and just arrive in the 21st century when it comes to relocation. So that's what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Lynn, over to you next.
Yes, David, thank you. I am with Global Tax Network GTN. Like David, I'm a director, and here at GTN, we serve many companies with mobile employee issues as well as independent individuals that may seek to relocate to the United States. As James will speak about some challenges from an individual perspective. And when we support companies, it's so important, to Thomas's point, that many might be self-initiated within a company, and the companies may seek to provide just some consultation support, not necessarily tax return support through the company. So a lot of aspects to think about from a tax perspective for our inbound people that GTN looks to support.
Thank you very much. And James, last but by no means least.
Thanks, David. So my name is James Hollis. I'm the U.S. immigration attorney on this panel. I work for a firm that's called Siskin Susser, and we are based in Tennessee, which is the long state just above the south, below Kentucky in the United States, if you're looking at a map. We work with companies globally, so we have clients all over the United States and internationally as well. We're a very good law firm with many good attorneys. For my part, I am a specialist in corporate immigration for highly skilled workers, entrepreneurs, entertainers, athletes, basically all of the categories that start with E. But really, yeah, I help executives and workers come over to the United States from Europe and from India and from China and many other countries. So that is all of my focus. That's all of the focus of my practice.
Thanks, James. You're not solely focused on that letter of the alphabet, though. In terms of your client names have to be Edward or Edwina. So if it's anyone else, you can.
So when I was writing it down earlier, it was like, wow, all of those happen to be E's, but athletes are not E's. So yes, no, I work with highly skilled talent workers. So that's not an E.
That's good enough. And just before we go to the first question, and I'll come back to you, James, for that, so you can prepare. Just to let everyone know who's listening, there is a question function in the control panel. So if you have any questions at any time, please do type them in there. I can see them, and then I will raise them. So I'll let each speaker have their slot, and then we'll raise the question at that point. And then right at the end, we'll have a general Q&A if there's anything that was left untouched at that point. So just wanted to reiterate that point. So James, I'm going to come to you first, and just from an immigration perspective, what is it that companies and individuals need to think about in terms of that people mobility perspective into the US? What's going on right now? Maybe that's the best place to start. What's happening in the US?
So it's been a very difficult 12 months. I mean, obviously, it's been a difficult 12 months for, I think, everyone in every industry, but it's been particularly challenging in US immigration law because so many things had reduced processing during the COVID-19 pandemic. I would say the best way to think about it is by breaking the US immigration system up into two sort of tiers or two steps. The first is immigration processing in the United States. Right now, immigration processing is basically where it was pre-pandemic. There are some delays in some categories, mostly family-based cases, but in terms of business immigration, that step in the United States is taking the amount of time that it took before the pandemic. There was a period of 4 months in which it wasn't doing that, but now it's sort of back to normal. Probably the more challenging aspect of it, and certainly the part that's been more in the news, is the travel bans and the problems with people getting visas. So the second step in the second tier of the process is actually obtaining a visa from a US consulate abroad. Because of COVID restrictions in the local areas and also the travel bans that the US has implemented for travelers coming in from Europe, the UK, Ireland, which unfortunately we still have to separate the UK out, David, so apologies, after Brexit. So there's a travel ban in place for folks who have been in Europe or the UK for the 14 days prior to admission. And what that's doing is it's causing a lot of delays at the consulates who are having to evaluate whether or not somebody can get a waiver from that ban to enter the United States. So in addition to the long backlogs that are occurring from the fact that the consulates have not been at full capacity for over a year at this point, there's also an additional burden on them while they're trying to process these cases for normal people who have visas and would otherwise be able to come to the US, but for the travel bans. But there is good news on the horizon, and I tell this to my clients every day. I feel like I've been telling it to my clients for the past like 10 months, and maybe they're just going to stop believing me at this point. But the Biden administration announced last week that they are preparing working groups with the European governments, the UK, Canada, to try to reopen or figure out how they're going to reopen travel, which that will be, I think, the step that's going to really begin to reduce the backlog, so begin to reduce the burden on the U.S. consulates, which are the main delay in the process at the moment.
Right, that's and I suppose that actually leads into my next question. I've been European originally, as you said, from the UK. That's still part of Europe, as far as I'm concerned. So, are there any differences between the countries that, so if you're coming from Germany to the US or France, or you mentioned the UK, but what if we get into the detail? So it's not even just the sort of travel bans and the sort of lead times, the quarantine times, etc. But what about actual paperwork? What do people need to think about from that perspective?
So generally, there aren't, at least from continental Europe and the UK, there aren't really differences between the categories that you can apply for. If you get outside of continental Europe and you're looking at nationals of non-Western European countries, there can be slight differences. Generally, what you see instead is slight differing processes when you're in the particular countries, because each of the consular systems, so the UK consular system and the German consular system, are each kind of operate as their own little fiefdoms. Which is to say they all have their own organization. They get to determine how they shift around applications and caseloads. The general benefit to being in Germany versus the UK is that there are more consulates, they're generally better staffed, and you have more options in terms of applying. So you can apply at Berlin, you can apply at Munich, you can apply at Frankfurt, whereas if you're in the UK, you can apply at London or you can apply at Belfast, which is rather more difficult to get to. So generally, the U.S. immigration system does break things up according to nationality, but practically speaking, the real interface that an individual is going to have with the system is going to be dealing with the individual consulates. So Germany's slightly better, but absent the pandemic, the U.S. Embassy in London is one of the highest volume consulates in the world for the U.S. So many people go through there, and it generally works.
And so, and that sort of lead time, really, if someone was really planning, let's say then right now they're thinking that the news is good, the vaccines are being rolled out, and parking all the issues aside for those, the vaccine issues themselves, but what sort of lead time should a company or an individual be thinking about in terms of, okay, I'm looking to take on this role from, let's say September, let's say Labor Day, which is usually the sort of first week in September. When should you start? Should they have started already, or is it?
I gotta look at the calendar. So now is actually a perfect time for it. If there was no pandemic, most of the corporate type cases can be completed in sort of a 1 to 2 month timeline. The processing in the US, so again, think of it as a two-step process. First is processing in the US for most cases. Second is processing it abroad. So the first step can still be completed and filed quite quickly. It's really the question of when visa interviews are going to reopen, and the extent to which the company is in an industry that can get an exemption from the travel ban, that sort of situation. So really, I feel like at this point, probably the best point is to go and speak to an immigration attorney and evaluate, hey, is this something that we even have the option to do within a 3 month time horizon, or is it more likely that it's going to be sort of toward the end of the fall when things are, fingers crossed, opening back up in a more significant way? What I keep telling my clients on this point is there's nothing keeping you from getting into the visa line at this point. So, we're still filing cases like normal with the understanding that we're at least in line at this point. So when they start doing the visa appointments again, sort of en masse or at their standard processing levels, we're going to be in line and we're going to be ready for it. So I guess the good thing about the travel ban, and I'll end on this, is that at least it's giving, a lot of times before the travel ban, you'd see, okay, I'm relocating, I need to complete all of this within a month and get it done, there's a lot more lead time. So you can get the immigration case right, and you can also get everything else synced up so that when you're actually arriving in the U.S., there's not any sort of rushed, because even if you do rush, you're not going to get through the visa backlog at this moment.
I've got so many. I'm going to keep going because there's lots of questions falling in my head as you're talking. So some of my clients actually say to me things like, "Well, can't I just come across on an ESTA, or can't I work on that? I can come across, do a quick business trip, maybe 30 days, 60 days, do a bit of recce into the US. Is that right? Can they do that? Or is that something they should?
So the first thing I would say is the definition of work and the use of the term work is a really charged term in immigration law. So while somebody may think of it as work, and while our clients may think of it as work when they're coming in, we have to make a distinction between what they're actually doing in the US and what they're not doing. So work in US immigration law is defined as something that a US worker would otherwise do. So if you're coming from a European-based company and that you don't have a US entity established, you're meeting with customers, you're doing all of these the standard things that you're going to do on a business trip, sending emails, you're getting paid from a European source, even though you're consulting in the US or you're answering questions in the US, that's not work from a US immigration perspective. And anytime that somebody sort of says that, like you say you're coming in, oh, I'm coming on a work trip, and it's like, whoa, no, you're coming on to do business. You're coming on a business trip. That's all permitted. Where it becomes more complicated is where there's a U.S. entity established, and you may be interacting with U.S.-based staff and managing them or managing them in the business that they're doing. That becomes a little bit more complex, and you want to talk to somebody. This often comes up with entrepreneurs as well who are establishing their companies in the United States. Establishing companies, making investments in the United States, getting bank accounts, assuming that you can enter. That's all permitted. It is going to be a bit more challenging during COVID times unless you have you can get a national interest exemption, which I've certainly helped European companies enter on ESTAs doing that. The way around that, if you have a valid ESTA, is to go and take a vacation in the Caribbean for 14 days before coming to the U.S. So as long as you sync up your vacation with your U.S.-based business consulting, then you're in great shape. But otherwise, everyone's still stuck outside until the travel ban goes away.
Okay, right. So there is some sort of methodology you can, sort of timeline planning, as well as, you say clever use of, or careful use of wording, I guess, when you're at the border agency.
Well, exactly. And in one point there, so there are 3 approvals required, and I'm sure I'll go into this a little bit later, but there are 3 approvals required to get into the U.S. on a visa. It's the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services petition approval. It's a visa approval, and then it's admission at the port of entry. And that last part is determined by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And the thing that they're always concerned about for folks on ESTA is how long are they staying? What are they doing? Are they working? Their assumption that they sort of have an on-off switch of like, everyone's working until you establish to me that you're not working. So the more sort of nuanced you can be in what you're doing, and the more documentation you have of that, like, I'm taking these meetings, I'm not working, the more likely you're going to have a very smooth entry.
Right. Okay. That's yeah. Just from experience, it's a scary moment when you're at the border agency and they're grilling you about what are you doing here and all the rest of it. So yeah, it can be quite.
It's scary. It's scary for me too, because I have to tell them I'm an immigration lawyer, then they get angry.
Right.
Like,
no. A very quick story. The guy asked me what I did, and I said just generally I said I'm an accountant, and he said, oh, have you seen that Ben Affleck film? And for anyone who has never seen it, that film called The Accountant, he's an assassin. Ben Affleck is an assassin. Oh, I just said, yes, I have seen it. And of course, I'm an assassin. And then I thought, why do I just say that to the border agents? Anyway, he did let me in, which obviously was good. Obviously, I don't look like an assassin. There you go. For anyone who was stranded, so let's say you had a visa previously and you were stranded back in Europe, and they couldn't get back in. What's the sort of rule? Any guidance around that? Can they just come back as soon as they want to, or is they've still got to go through that protocol? Have they got to renew anything?
Well, so it's going to depend on whether they have what's called a visa stamp in their passport. So immigration lawyers generally call the actual visa in your passport a visa stamp. So if you've got a valid visa stamp, the challenge right now is that if you're in continental Europe or the UK during the 14 days prior to your attempted entry in the United States, they're going to refuse you. Really, it's the people at the border aren't going to refuse you. It's going to be the people at the airline. They're not going to let you actually board the plane.
Right.
So the way around that for folks who are still stuck in Europe, which unfortunately is a considerable amount of people, because that's what we are dealing with on a daily basis in all of the countries that are under the travel ban, including Brazil, including China and India, not Iran as much. But you have to figure out the logistics of moving outside of the travel banned area for a period of time before you can re-enter. And the area where, like the countries where those people have sort of congregated over the last year have changed. So for a while it was Mexico. For a while it was randomly Serbia because there was a direct flight to New York that didn't touch down in any of the Schengen countries. I've also sent people to the Caribbean. I know it was a joke, but somebody did have a nice 14-day vacation on his immigration lawyer. I've had people wait in Dubai as well. It's possible to get back in. I think overall that's likely to be the swifter way to deal with the issue than to file a national interest exemption request at a U.S. consulate, because I heard yesterday I'm involved in a lot of our firm's involved in a lot of lawsuits with the Department of State on this issue right now. They're receiving something like 20,000 requests at certain consulates a day for national interest exemptions. So really, it's not something that's going to be resolved quickly. Like if it's easier and it's not too cost prohibitive to send somebody to a third country, have them sit at a hotel for 14 days and then come to the US, that's going to be the fastest way to get it done.
Right.
And if you don't have a visa, that's where it becomes a little bit more challenging, because there's a lot of competition for the countries that are having a good enough COVID situation that the U.S. consulates are reopening, which I would say primarily is in Asia at this point. There's a ton of competition in Mexico. Canada's not open for third country national applicants at the moment. That's where a lot of work is being done, and I would say not a lot of progress is being made. So it's a lot of effort for not much result at this point.
Right. And my last question before I just open up to Lynn and Thomas just briefly on this in relation to any views they've got on this topic. But in terms of vaccinations, is the US requesting and requiring proof of anything at this stage? Is there any wind of change coming in that sense?
So it's required right now. It's requiring everyone to have a negative COVID test and a particular type of negative COVID test within 72 hours of travel. Again, this is primarily being policed by the airlines themselves. So if you are traveling and you are able to get through the travel ban, make sure you connect with the airline, because they're going to follow the CDC guidance. Most of the time, there's not been much of an issue there. I suspect the working groups that they're preparing are trying to figure out how they deal with the fact that people are are being vaccinated, and that some of the countries where there are travel bans, it makes no more sense because they don't have COVID outbreaks. We're still working through that as a country right now, though. So yeah, I think it's on the horizon.
Thank you. Right, Thomas, Lynn, I just turning to you. Any sort of thoughts, maybe from any sort of corporate tax or anything like that, from immigration issues around that, individual or corporate tax? Lynn, just
so from an individual perspective and tax realm, residence has different terminology from a tax position than an immigration position. So, and visa types can impact your U.S. taxation with exemption from Social Security and income tax, depending on your structure for holdings. So corporate implications, you need to have your employers with the proper visa in order to work. And to James's point, what truly is work? Are there registrations from a corporate side necessary to do business if you haven't yet gotten that set up? There's federal requirements, state, localities, all those types of registrations that are required. And of course, coming in as an individual, making certain that all of their paperwork is set up as an employee to be have your social security number set. And if you have dependents, they may need special identification numbers if they're not eligible for the social security numbers. So coming into the US, there's multiple facets from the corporate side, individual side. So planning is of utmost importance as companies or individuals are coming into the United States to touch on unexpected tax consequences associated with the relocation.
Fantastic. So I'm not gonna let you. I'm just gonna ask Thomas, and I'm gonna come back to you so you can, talk all about tax and social security and those sort of things. So Thomas, anything just briefly from an immigration perspective, anything maybe the family needs to think about, or there's sort of technology that might be out there to help with this, the immigration?
The point is, technology would be great to fast track things, but as my colleague here, James, can attest to it, fast tracking is very complicated, especially with COVID. And in general, unfortunately, the US just doesn't have any real tech behind it. Not talking from our tech perspective, obviously, just because that's the world we are living in. And there are internationally quite good solutions where in different countries, for example, in Germany, they do connect on immigration level and manage to fast track things. But in the US, it's just, we are not there yet, put it that way.
Right, perfect. Okay, Lynn, so we're very pleased to hear, James, that your responses was so detailed that nobody has any questions on the immigration just yet, but we might come back to some later. So Lynn, I'm going to turn to you now. So this is, the immigration bit is obviously the planning up front. That's the, can I get there? What do I need to do to get there? So now you're in the US. There's obviously some things to do, as you just mentioned beforehand, or to think about pretty soon after landing. What else needs to be thought about? And this is, I mean, you and I could talk for hours on this topic because we're just so geeky, but what do people need to think about from, payroll, taxation, social security, those things?
So a company, when they're bringing in a person, wants to abide by the US obligations, and do they have a plan in place where they're localizing them as a hire here in the United States? Do they have a policy where they're going to cover them under a tax equalization arrangement and hold them to a home country tax? So as I said, your social security number is your identifying number that sets off everything. Every organization, institution, anything you need to do here in the US needs that social security number. And I made reference to if you're not eligible for the social security number, in order to claim some credits on your tax returns for spouses and dependents, they will need a special individual taxpayer identification number, ITIN, and that is a separate process that has to be submitted as part of the US tax return submission. So that's a bit of an onerous exercise. It is talked about the backlog with immigration issues. The IRS is flooded with tax returns that have been processed, especially paper filed ones, and those are the ones with the ITIN application. So that takes quite a bit of time to get processed, and have patience and know the steps and the documentation that's required in order to get those submissions completed as part of your tax return. And once an individual is planning to come into the United States, we have a window of time. Immigration is underway, so it's very important to have the discussions as to what does an individual's move into the US mean to them based on their personal situation. Are they directors in non-US companies? Do they have holdings that are not beneficial? They may be beneficial in our home country, but not necessarily any type of benefit as a US-based taxpayer. So numerous cross-border issues for compensation. You come into the US, once you're here in the US as a resident, you're taxed on worldwide income. Even if you may receive a bonus in March attributable to your prior year's service, and you may have only been in the US for 2 months, the US is going to tax that in full. Is there a relief? Well, For federal purposes, there's a credit allowed, but double taxation can occur if you are a resident of a state and of course a locality that they don't allow an offset for tax credit. So double tax is definitely a possibility for some components of compensation upon a cross-border fact pattern. Pensions are an issue. We want to have an understanding for pension considerations and holdings, and is there a treaty in place that there might be some disclosures required for relief for US purposes, but will there be a taxation point at some time? Oh, sorry,
there you go. Is that
okay? Sorry.
no, I don't know where that came up. Yeah, I think we're good now.
Personal investments and holdings. The IRS makes it very challenging for US residents to own non-US assets. Disclosures are required and onerous taxation can occur for any funds that are held that are deemed to be what are called passive foreign investment companies. So all of these types of onerous reportings, we want to have a conversation about before an inbound person comes. Are there some considerations to be taken into place to alleviate a US tax burden and reporting obligations? Once you're here in the United States, your withholdings are set with a form W-4, and many companies have an online portal to do that. The IRS has a website to assist for withholding setting. Here in the US, withholdings are typically on our earnings, and we can make adjustments for our outside income. And if we have a bonus payment or a supplemental payment, here in the US, the withholding is at a 22% rate, which may not be a sufficient rate. So some employees may want to adjust the withholdings to have an additional amount throughout the year, or may want to plan to make estimated payments when they receive those bonus funds or equity components of compensation. So here, as we said, is there double taxation possibility from a federal perspective? Credits are allowed, but state jurisdictions, a person coming into, say, Germany into the United States gets $1 million bonus in March, and they moved in November. The US is going to seek 2/12 or source that as US source. The full source, the foreign source piece is allowed a credit for federal purposes, offset on the 10/12 of income. But as a resident of New York City and New York State, there is no relief in that regard.
Right. And you're talking about payroll there. It's a question that comes up. I know that we've discussed it a few times. Is that payroll requirement absolutely necessary? I get this asked from clients or prospective, people coming in for the first time, from companies certainly, and even individuals. Do I have to run a payroll? And
payroll compliance is quite a foundation for doing business here in the US. A company has an obligation to report, withhold, remit. If a person comes in from Germany for a stated duration, as we said, under an equalization type of arrangement, they still have the relationship with the German company. An application can be submitted so that the individual, under the totalization agreement between the US and Germany, to continue to fund into the German scheme and be exempt from US Social Security. And under audit, that certificate coverage is shown, so the company has the basis for that withholding position for the duration of that certificate in place.
Great, thank you. So I think that's, and it may sometimes be what they call a shadow payroll as well, isn't it? There's those sort of arrangements, yes, which are complex to, not impossible to set up, but just can be a little bit more complex, just with the information flow and the timing of payments and that sort of thing. So
most definitely.
Just very briefly on the U.S. immigration side. So if you have foreign workers on non-immigrant visas, the primary way that U.S. immigration evaluates whether that person is what's called in status or maintaining their status is by looking at payroll records. So oftentimes that's a huge aspect of my practice is evaluating old payroll records. So if you're going to move non-immigrant workers in, that's needs to be done sort of in the timeline that you're having somebody employed. So just the immigration 2 cents.
No, that's useful to know actually. That's good point. And what sort of lead time, Lynn? Anything, you know, setting up the individual on payroll, is it fairly instant? Is it like a 3-month process? I mean, it's
you expect the individual to submit their social security, get their social security number. They're here, they should be able to get onboarded with their employer in relatively short order.
Great, thank you. Yeah, because I know that there's some, getting questions around, should they still be paid from their home country? Are they being paid in the US? There's all those sort of practical questions to go through, and all those options are available. It's just a case of getting the process set up correctly. We generally hate split payrolls. I think is probably the just sort of the shudder that you've given there is enough to convince people that's probably something to think about.
Yes, it's such an administrative, but I personally don't work with any companies that are doing that currently because of the challenges and the resources it takes to make that run smoothly.
And my last tax question, because I know we've very much focused, or you've very much focused on sort of employment income and employment taxation and what the employer needs to do. Are there any other individual aspects just to think about? And there I'm thinking, like gift and trusts and things like that. Just to throw it out there, just nothing too detailed. Just be aware of this before you come.
In the U.S., it's so important because you have your individual taxation, but when you're relocating here, by virtue of being here, there's income tax rules. There's, as David mentioned, state gift tax rules. Those rules are impacted by your situs and where your assets are, and getting professional guidance from firms that will support that is of utmost importance. And there may be some entity structure based on your fact patterns for holding some assets. Trusts may come into play from a holding in Germany coming into the US that may require special reporting. So pre-planning is so important to get all the aspects of US taxation, individual, corporate, estate, trust, and gift on that level.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's, again, I think we're just speaking from experience where someone's touched ground in the US, you're then talking to them about their tax affairs, and then they just throw in this sort of one comment which says, oh yeah, the family trust and or whatever it is, and you're like, oh, whoa, what's going on there? So yeah, so it's useful to cover that point. Thank you. Thomas, just very quickly from you, is there anything, again, I'm just thinking about the ease of this process, because it can be quite overwhelming. You've got all these different sort of avenues of paperwork and tasks to look at. Is there anything from a relocation perspective, from the tax point of view, that can help? You've seen, you have a process or something can help with this?
So we have basically 2 things, right? First is the social security number. That's how kind of your life starts in the US. Without that, you can't really get anything done. So this is something where we can support you, and there are several ways. And that's the beauty of being tech. You can get things done even before you ever hit ground in the US. So you can seamlessly book, for example, social security services, which are a great example, through our platform, your app, and decide how much handholding do you want? Do you want just us remotely support you and listen, this is where you have to go, this is the application, just do it? Or do you feel more like, okay, when I'm arriving in the US, please stand in front of the hotel, pick me up, go with me to the appointment? Back in the days pre-COVID, nowadays appointments where you can show up, but in the good old days, and hopefully the days going forward, where we can bring a client there and we have an expertise on the ground who arranges everything. So with Social Security, you can be really ahead of the game even before you come here and put everything in a place where in a perfect world, the first day you arrive, you go from the airport to your hotel to get your social security number. With taxation, that's you guys are you are the experts. So in this case, we are more like the middleman. On our platform, we have vetted partners like yourself, who we connect clients through. But you can use our platform to upload all the documents, to host all the documents, to transfer it to your immigration advisor, your taxation advisor, whoever you work with. So basically, we are just the middleman, but also the point of contact. So everything can be bundled in one way, and you save yourself about 1 trillion emails going left and right and trying to scroll back and what did we say then and where is this file going, and yeah, basically our partners are there and they are all connected, so we can all work on the same platform. That's what we can do.
I think you raised a really good point there. I think that's something where, you know, I've been doing this in mobility now for about 20 something years, and you know, I think to some extent early on it was very siloed. You know, we very much, you did your whatever your specialism was, that's how you worked. And I think from a sort of people experience, a company experience of dealing with vendors, that has changed dramatically in the last sort of 10 years, where it's all about the experience and almost a one-stop shop, that single point of contact. I know it's still changing, it's still evolving, but you know, how can all this information that's so important to get the immigration right, the tax right, and the experience right, the moving process, you know, you get that wrong, that could be the end of, you know, someone might say I don't want to go, you know, it's just too tough. So how do we get that right? And I think actually, Thomas, that probably leads into the relocation itself and the actual sort of function, the actual experience. You know, what are you seeing? What's happening in your world at the moment around relocation? What are companies doing and how are they supporting their assignees?
I mean, COVID obviously brought a break in all of our lives, and I think it was great because it gave also people time to think, how could we do things better? And right now I see two, I would say, major things happening on the marketplace. One is that companies, especially startups or small size companies, are moving to a lump sum approach. They are telling their new employees, here you go, there's an amount X, please spend it however you want. I just want you to be there at this and this time. Get it done. And this is obviously, they give you a little bit of support, and especially if you come to the US, immigration is a big thing, so they need obviously documentation from the company and what so on. But in general, they leave it to the employee to figure it out. Again, with startups, usually these are younger employees, they are tech savvy. Even if they move with their partner, sometimes they already know people at their destination. They have kind of their network, they go through all the social media and they are back connected. So there's less of an issue. And those clients, for example, love our platform because they see the transparency. They have a budget. They want to know how much it's going to cost before, and they can see the price. If I book service A, B, or C, and how much service do I want? It's going to cost me so much, and they figure out, okay, basically everything that's out there, half of it I can solve myself because I have a guy there, or I know somebody, or this is easy for me. And there are some things that are like, okay, this is way too complicated. I don't want to touch that. I want to have an expert on the ground helping me with this. So the lump sum approach really freed up, I think, a lot in this whole relocation world, going away from the HR department just booking a vendor who's taking care of everything, either you like it or not. As the employee gets relocated, you're kind of stuck in the system, and you really, all you can do is give bad reviews afterwards because it's like, this is done. You have to go along. So right. The lump is one approach, and the other approach, what we still see is obviously HR companies helping the employees and still work with vendors like ourselves. For some of them, we are, the preferred vendor, but that's more, I would say, middle management and higher ups, or when it comes to families. Just relocating families is just a much more complicated process, as we know. because you have one person who's been basically taken care of by the company, but then you have the children, you have the wife. You don't know, are they going to work in the US? Are they going to work remotely? To what kind of a visa do they need? Schooling, it's a very complicated topic in the US compared to, for example, Europe. You have very different school systems. If you decide not to go with an international school, you're suddenly, okay, this would be a great experience for my child, but I have no idea how that works. So
right.
an educational consultant, because it's just nothing seems to click from where I come from. So in these cases, HR is still working, big vendors, and are even coming to us and say, can you build an interface with us? Can you bring us to the next level of tech? Because we would like to do things seamlessly. We would like to have it trackable. We would like to have it easier. We just don't have the IT solution, so we are still a little bit back. And then we go in and build interfaces with them and work with them to basically what the lump sum approach gives the other ones to just work with us through our platform to integrate that within their systems of their companies.
So Thomas, just so if I'm hearing this correctly, so your sort of customer, your corporate client builds the interface with No Mobility, and then you then have on the ground kind of people, staff, employees, whatever, that actually help with schooling, housing, and that.
We have all these services, and if we don't have it in-house, we have vendors who we recommend, right. And they see ratings in our platform, and we can say we advise, obviously, as the point people on this, and again maybe as the middleman. But yeah, we are here to help our clients through the whole process from the beginning to the end, and we do B2B and B2C. And I think that's a big thing that's just out there right now. As we started to say, there's people mobility, and individuals just sometimes don't have what the company is offering them.
Mm-hmm.
So like, okay, how do I get this done? This is super complex. I thought it would be easy. I just wanted to live a year in New York and work from there, and then suddenly
And sorry to interrupt you. I think that to me is really interesting, because I think that's something which we'll see happen differently, and I think in all of our worlds will be a sort of slightly different approach to before, where maybe it's been more of a corporate request to send somebody over. As you say now, with remote work and these nomadic workers and all these whatever you want to call them, digital workers and all that, you could literally say, I actually fancy living in New York or working out of Manhattan for a year. I'm going to do that myself. My company said, yeah, you can do it, but let's park all the tax issues for one moment on that. But that's I'm happy for you to go and do that. You maybe have sponsored the visa, but you're on your own. We're not going to give you any support. There's no lump sum. There's nothing. And then so you have individuals now coming straight to you saying, help us. I need to find.
They are going to our app, going to our platform, and see everything we can offer, and be like, okay, I don't need everything, but home search, I'm like overwhelmed. I'm sitting in London. I went to all these websites. I don't even understand what they mean with net rent and grocery. What kind of paperwork? This is insane. Can you help me, please? And then one of our consultants, jumps on a call, explains the basics, and tries to set up showings once they arrive to make sure that they have a home for their
right.
Right?
And this is I've chosen Manhattan just simply because I sit in New Jersey, so it's on my doorstep. This is anywhere in the US, so anyone coming in, the services go across. So if you needed someone in Chicago or San Francisco, again, it's sort of a
so where we are right now is we just started our expansion to the US at the beginning of the year. So right now we are very strong in the tri-state area, meaning Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York. We do have also consultants in, for example, we have somebody in Utah, and we are growing. So within the next couple of months, our plan is to go and be strong on the West Coast, obviously going down to Texas, But we have also certain requests from Europe with companies. They're like, we are going there. Can you help us? And then we are happy to grow with the company and say, okay, you would need our services in a certain area. We can set up shop there, and we have partners throughout the US who can help us, with whom we already are, in contact. And our main goal is that everybody can supply the same service, and you can have the same experience wherever you go in the US. So we bet with our partners and be like, okay, you want to go to Utah, we want to make sure that you have the best mobility experience. It be Munich, Berlin, and Utah, or Salt Lake City in that case, or you have it in New Jersey, or you have it in
Right. That's good to know. And what's going? I've asked the other two the same question, so I have to ask the same to you. In terms of lead time planning, if someone was looking, let's say September, I want to move over in September. I've got my immigration's now taken care of. I know what I need to do from James. I've got to set up a payroll. I've got to look at my whatever it is, entity structure. Thanks, Lynn. Thomas, what do I need to do? When do I start? Do I start now? Do I contact you next month? What's
earlier the
better.
There's nothing wrong with have just a call, just to have a conversation to understand what are your needs going to be. If it's all you're right here, the only one is to help you to open a bank account, then probably there's no real need to be in contact for months. But if it's a complex situation where it's, for example, you come with your family and you have children, and after Labor Day they have to be in school somewhere, I would say you should have called me yesterday.
Right. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Especially international school, you need admission, you need interviews, you get all sorted out. If you have very special housing needs because you think this is the lifestyle I want to live, although let's say, for example, in New York, there's a lot of the market, but there's also high demand. Same goes for San Francisco. So the sooner we know about it, the sooner we get on it. Maybe you're gonna end up renting something sight unseen with our consultant going there and taking video tours, because you might just miss out on that. So I think the more we know and the earlier we know, the better we can assist you to make this as smooth as possible. That's what I always tell our clients.
Thank you. And I think that's we're approaching the end of the almost the hour. So I'm going to see if there's just check on some questions. There's a few that have come in. Actually, it's one for you, James, which is let me just make sure I get the. There it is. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you, James. But I've got a question for each of you just before we do wrap. So the natural predictions to the end of the year. So I'm going to plant that seed in your mind right now in terms of what you predict by the end of 2021, moving into 2022. So you can start thinking about that. But James, in the meantime, and I suppose this actually applies again to everyone, but focus on you first. What qualities should I look for in a US immigration firm or attorney? I think it's a really good question, without being too disparaging.
Yeah, right. Well, so the thing about U.S. immigration attorneys, particularly in the corporate area, is that there are a lot of good ones. The key is making sure that their sort of practice matches up with the size of your company and your needs as a company. So generally in the U.S. immigration space, there are really large corporate immigration providers that they're very good at really high volume work that's very similar. And then below that, there are business immigration attorneys and business immigration firms that can do the higher volume stuff, but can also provide more focused and detailed legal work. So it depends on the types of cases that you're dealing with. So if it's a very large company, you can find a corporate immigration firm that can do a lot of cases. Sometimes if it's a smaller company or if you need more guidance, you're going to have to engage with a smaller immigration firm in order to get the personalized attention that you're going to want on your individual cases. Sometimes that's a little bit more expensive as well, so keep that in mind. And generally, if you're looking for an immigration attorney, you want to look for two things. One is that they're a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, because every immigration attorney who is practicing has to be a member of that in order to keep up to date on all of the changes that are happening all the time. There are about 13,000 members. Most of them are not business immigration practitioners. The second thing, this is a plug for a group that my firm's a part of, which is called the Alliance of Business Immigration Lawyers. Some of the best immigration lawyers in the country, particularly focusing on the corporate area, are in that group. And that group is called the Alliance of Business Immigration Lawyers. You really can't go wrong if you find anybody in that group.
Fantastic, thank you. That's good to know. And I think from the tax perspective, we'd probably say something similar. You know, there's lots of professionals out there with similar sort of accreditation. So again, choose the one that you find the right person, make sure that you fit with them and you get on with them and that sort of thing. So yeah, thanks, that's good. Thomas, another one come in, and I'm going to focus a little bit on you on this because it's actually referenced to your comment around the Uber of relocation. Just very briefly, really very short, just explain what that is exactly. Why it is you think you're the Uber of relocation?
I think the Uber relocation means, if you think how Uber changed the way of, let's say, mobility, not global mobility, but our mobility. You have one app in your hand. You see exactly when your driver is going to be here. You see upfront how much it's going to cost you. You get invoiced automatically. You don't need to sit in a cab, get your credit card, get cash, have a discussion with him why he's not driving faster. We are sitting in the traffic. I'm afraid I'm going to pay more. And it's kind of the same idea. You have one tool that has everything. You're going to know your price up front because the prices are online. It's fully transparent, and
right.
You see everything in real time. Every time one of the jobs is done, it's reflected in our app. You can rate all the consultants at the end of the day. You can rate all the services, and we even build a community in our app, so you can give tips to other people who are relocated with us. So I think it's really just how Uber changed the old school cab limousine industry. I think we can change an industry that had always it's all corporate, the pricing has been discussed somewhere somehow, and invoices are flying around, but what do I know? And that just opens up something that used to be maybe luxury a little bit to everybody. Everybody who's also there and said, I want to relocate and I want to help with it, and that's feasible, the price is right, and I'm in charge of it, and not somebody else.
Fantastic. So yeah, it sounds very different. It's just it's a good question, because I think it sounds like it's a different way of engaging, as you say, the person who's relocating. Okay, so 2 minutes left. Lynn, I'm going to come to you first. Predictions for the rest of this year in tax, nothing generally. Just tax, not there's going to be a solar eclipse or something.
In tax, hopefully we'll get some guidance and we won't have historical changes to capital gains. That's been a topic of conversation. Don't know whether that'll come to be. So we'll expect rates to go up, but hopefully it won't be retroactive. That's my hope.
Good, excellent. James, any thoughts there?
I look forward to being wrong here, but I would say there's going to be more stabilization of the system. So over the past 4 years, there have been a lot of regulatory and sort of sub-regulatory changes that have impacted the way that people are going to experience the immigration process. I don't expect there to be wholesale changes in terms of new legislation that's changing the entire system. I think what's more likely is that it's minor stuff that most people aren't going to notice, but the people going through the process really will feel the difference in the experience.
Great, thank you. And Thomas?
I think Q4 there's going to be an immense influx of people moving to the US. I think we're going to sort out everything that's right now holding people back. Hopefully, COVID is really, I would say, vaccines have stabilized on both sides of the pond. We're going to see a lot of people coming. There is a lot of demand. So I hope we are heading towards much better time.
Yeah, I think we all do. I think that's certainly. I think if I asked myself that question, I would probably give them the same answer as you, Thomas. There, I think it's just hoping to see things reopen and get getting back to some sort of travel and international working would be fantastic. Great, well, thank you very much. We've just turned the hour, so thank you all to my panelists, and thank you to those of you who joined and listened in. Thank you very much. A recording will be available. We'll send that round in the next day or two. So thanks again, and enjoy the Euros. Speak soon.
Thank you.
Okay.